வணக்கம் அன்புக்குரிய நேயர்களே. இலங்கை பற்றிய ஐநா மனித உரிமை ஆணையாளருடைய அறிக்கை வெளியாகி இருக்கிறது. பெருமளவில் போர்க்குற்றங்கள் நிகழ்த்தப்பட்டிருக்கின்றன என்பதை உறுதி செய்கிறது இந்த அறிக்கை. இந்த விசாரணை அமைப்பை உருவாக்கியவர், இதற்கு பிள்ளையார் சுழி போட்டவர், இதனை வடிவமைத்தவர், உருவாக்கியவர் முன்னாள் ஐநா மனித உரிமை ஆணையாளர் நவநீதம் பிள்ளை. இன்று உலக தமிழர்கள் ஒரு சர்வதேச விசாரணை தான் இந்த விவகாரத்துக்கு தீர்வு என சொல்ல இதை 2009 வலியுறுத்தியவர் நவநீதம் பிள்ளை. இந்த விசாரணை அறிக்கை வெளியாகி இருக்கக்கூடிய சூழ்நிலையில் இதை மையப்படுத்திய மிகப்பெரிய பரபரப்பு ஏற்பட்டிருக்க இது சார்ந்த தீர்மானம் ஐநா மனித உரிமை கவுன்சிலில் வர இந்தியா எந்த நிலைப்பாட்டை எடுக்கப் போகிறது என கேள்விகள் எழும்ப நம்முடைய ஐநா முன்னாள் மனித உரிமை ஆணையாளர் நவநீதம் பிள்ளை இணைகிறார். நீதியரசர் திருமதி நவி பிள்ளை இந்த நிகழ்ச்சியில் பங்கு கொள்ள சம்மதித்ததற்கு நன்றி.
வணக்கம். தமிழ் பேச முதலே மன்னிக்க வேணும். I'm very happy to be on Thanthi TV.
It's a pleasure indeed, Your Excellency. Justice Pillay, you were a very strong advocate for an international investigation into the Sri Lankan tragedy. But now the High Commissioner's report is released and it calls for a hybrid special court. Are you satisfied with the outcome of this report?
I think that it's a great step, a great opportunity for long-term stability in Sri Lanka. It's an opportunity to address all issues and for everybody to be involved. Now, when I led the official UN mission to Sri Lanka to see the situation for myself after the Secretary General's panel had gone there, I spoke to many people, including the all sides, and it was clear to me that the idea of an independent international tribunal was not acceptable to the people because they wanted to be involved in the process. So therefore I support the call made by my successor, High Commissioner Zaid, calling for a hybrid tribunal.
Justice, don't you think the new regime has been given a long rope by the High Commissioner's office, despite the fact that they also denied access to the investigation team, just like their predecessors?
Well, that is very disappointing. This is for an investigation by the UN. It's a gesture by the UN to be of assistance to the people of Sri Lanka. So it's unfortunate, in my view, that the new government, the present government, also followed the practice of the Rajapaksa government in not admitting the investigation team in. However, let's wait and see what happens in the Human Rights Council. The decision of my successor to postpone the matter was supported by the three high-profile independent advisors to the investigation. And you know who they are. They were the former President of Finland, Martti Ahtisaari, the former Chief Justice of New Zealand, and the eminent advocate Asma Jahangir
from Pakistan.
So these three eminent advisors also felt the new government should be given a chance itself to consider the matter and also to cooperate with the investigation and provide perhaps new information that was not available to the office before.
Justice Pillay, you have been insisting on an international investigation since 2009. Why do you think it has taken so long to obtain an investigation into mass atrocities committed over 6 years ago?
Well, clearly the Rajapaksa government was not interested in an investigation, and they lobbied very strongly in the United Nations to ensure that there is no UN inquiry. And this is really very unique, that the Sri Lanka massacres were not raised in the Security Council as an international security threat and as huge violations of human rights. It was not raised and discussed in the UN General Assembly. It was only when the Secretary General, with the advice of the Legal Counsel and myself, that he does have the authority to do so, launched his own investigation. Now, while I sat as the High Commissioner for Human Rights in the Human Rights Council, I saw how governments who had been lobbied by the Rajapaksa government stopped the UN scrutiny. They, for instance, raised arguments that these are the internal affairs of Sri Lanka, and no other country should interfere in that. And I'm really disappointed that that position was also taken by India, the Indian government, and by my own government, the South African government.
The findings of the High Commissioner's report are very serious. Establishment of the fact that the offences were not pockets of crimes, but systematically coordinated, funded, resourced and executed by a hierarchical command structure is indeed appalling. Based on this and the detailed study you have made on this matter, do you believe there is a strong prima facie for genocide?
Well, the report does not talk about genocide. It talks about war crimes and crimes against humanity. And remember, it's only a court of law that can determine whether genocide has happened, because that is a very special crime. It requires proof of a special intent, which is to destroy a group or part of a group on political, religious, racial, and ethnic grounds. So it's a very special crime. But crimes against humanity are also very serious crimes. And I also was impressed with the facts produced by this report on which they base the allegations. But once again, these allegations in the report, we have to wait for a court of law to hear the evidence and come up with judicial findings.
But is there a prima facie? I understand it cannot be established at this stage, but is there a prima facie for commitment of genocide?
The elements have to be there. For instance, it was very clear in Rwanda that the intention was to destroy the Tutsi population. All the facts pointed to that, and this is what the court established. So the investigation points us in the direction. If this report, or court itself finds there was a deliberate intention to destroy, for instance, the Tamil population, I noticed that even the discussion on evidence of sexual violence against women and girls is reported to be systematic and intentional to destroy the Tamil group. So this is the kind of evidence the court will look into. It is not proper for us to think there's a prima facie case. It's sufficient that this report importantly gives us the opportunity to also form an opinion, because they set out what they found out.
I did an interview with the Sri Lankan cabinet spokesperson. He argues what has happened is not genocide, based on the fact that the conflict was only in the north. The Tamils in the rest of the country were living peacefully, even at the time when the conflict was taking place. So this does not constitute genocide. Is this argument convincing to you?
The Genocide Convention is clear. The intention is not required for destruction of a whole group. So it doesn't require an intention to destroy the whole of the Tamil group. The fact that some were killed and others not does not detract from the statute which says destruction in whole or in part of a group.
I get your point. With respect to the command structure that the report talks about, who do you believe was at the top? Where do you think the buck stopped? With just the army commanders, the army chief, the defense secretary, or the president himself?
The courts will always look at, as you say, where the buck stops. They will look at the line of authority and see who gave the orders and who authorized the killings, sexual violence, and destruction, and what was the policy. There must have been a policy behind these decisions. This is what they will look at.
In a recent interview, Sri Lanka's cabinet spokesperson Dr. Rajitha Senarathne told me that the new government too views the then President Rajapaksa as a war hero. He goes on to say that the office of the president would not have been aware of the planned torture and killing of innocents. Do you wish to comment on this?
Convention is very clear. They even failed to stop genocide from happening is a crime. This is what the International Court of Justice said about Serbia. So failing to prevent. So if you have knowledge and fail to stop your soldiers from committing these crimes, then that is also a crime of genocide, a crime of crime against humanity.
Do you believe President Rajapaksa failed to stop what happened, the atrocities?
Well, that's why we ask for a justice system. See, it's only a court. That's why we need just a court system to examine all this. This report, in my view, has moved the process quite a bit. It's an advancement in that they investigated, they say thoroughly, and they brought forward the evidence. And any court of law, whether it's a national court of Sri Lanka, a hybrid court, or an international court, will look at the evidence in order to determine who was responsible.
Justice Pillay, can the concept of immunity apply to war crimes and crimes against humanity too, considering the fact that these are often committed by people holding high offices of power?
International law is very clear. There can never be immunity for these very serious crimes, which we call the ICC crimes. So the law is clear. Nobody can grant amnesty. No governments can grant amnesties for these serious crimes.
Justice Pillay, Sri Lanka is opposed to any international mechanism in entirety and has reservations on the hybrid mechanism too. The Sri Lankan Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe recently told me in an interview that they can only consider a probe with domestic jurisdiction and some amount of international participation. The reason he gives is that Sri Lanka is not signatory to the Statute of Rome, and hence a trial without domestic jurisdiction is unacceptable to them. He told me that he has explained this position of his to you while you were in Colombo as well. Is this stance of the Prime Minister acceptable in your view?
That is the position adopted by the Sri Lankan government. It comes out of raising the issue of sovereignty over their own affairs and not wanting a UN or any other country to interfere. Yes, they are not parties to the Rome Statute. We're not talking about the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction over Sri Lanka. We're talking about the fact that the United Nations waited and waited for Sri Lanka over many years to have proper investigations, to prosecute culprits, and since they never did so, and they protected perpetrators, and crimes were ongoing, such as the white van that was around the city of Colombo picking up journalists, picking up opposition people, picking up critics, that the crimes were ongoing is what concerned the United Nations and the Secretary General to step in and at least have the situation investigated. In the United Nations' view, these are very serious crimes where thousands and thousands of people were killed. It's not just a single murder or two that comes under the jurisdiction of the national court. And I think that as the Sri Lankan government attends the debates in the Human Rights Council, they should see how important it is for them to have international assistance here, because these are very widespread crimes and need to be investigated.
As believed widely, do you also believe that there is a change in approach and there is a positive approach on the part of the new Sri Lankan regime, at least relatively?
I did follow that the current government certainly has not been so violently opposed to an investigation. They have, to an extent, cooperated. And this is a very good sign.
Justice Pillay, the previous government in Sri Lanka was not just recalcitrant, but was horrendously hostile in their approach to you and your office. They questioned your ethnicity, they called you tigress in the UN, they colored your vision. Certain uncouth remarks made by certain senior ministers breached all realms of public decency. You were targeted for simply doing your job. Did that hurt you or affect you in any way, Justice Pillay?
I am human like anyone else, and when you're doing a job, it hurts when these unfounded abuses are hurled at you. I actually raised it with then President Rajapaksa, when one of the ministers said that he will marry me to silence. And President Rajapaksa said, you know, it's not so bad. The word in Sinhalese doesn't only mean marry, it means tied. I said to him, that makes it worse.
Did he went on to defend the minister? President Rajapaksa? That's appalling, Ms. Pillay.
Yeah, so I made it clear that I think it's abuse, that Sri Lankan government had invited me into the country, and this is not the way you treat a guest, particularly a high-level representative of the United Nations. And the Secretary General also was very concerned about this. He called me to ask whether he should take some action here. And I said, I'm in the country here, I'm handling it, and you will recall that I went public on that.
Not just the Sri Lankan side, the sections of Tamil diaspora also did not spare you for your findings and observations on the LTT.
That needed to be said. I was about the only person who publicly pointed out the atrocities committed by the LTTE and urged the world outside not to glorify this terrorist group, but to condemn the crimes they committed against Tamils, against moderate Tamils, opposition leaders. One of the first visits I made to Sri Lanka was the one-year anniversary of the killing of Neelam Tiruchelvam. And look at that. We can't afford to lose good people like that. But they were killed by their own group, by their own Tamil group.
Justice Pillay, what were your major findings with respect to the war crimes by the LTT? Would you say that they were responsible for a large portion of the human rights violations as claimed by the Sri Lankan government? In what way did LTT's actions contribute to the large-scale tragedy at the end of the war?
Well, I invite everybody to read this report. It's an extensive report and also documents violations and crimes allegedly committed by the LTTE, which go a long way, even prior to 2002. I think that if the LTT provided leadership like we had in South Africa with President Mandela, that's the kind of leadership would have moved the country forward instead of resorting to terrorism. So that needs to be said. Now, I don't know to what extent they contributed and how many deaths and atrocities they were responsible for. This is again something that courts of law will eventually decide upon. Once again, this is why we need a judicial inquiry.
Ms. Pillay, as you pointed out, several countries of South Asia, including India, have continuously been opposed to international justice mechanisms. Why do you think this is the case? As a country that has shown keen involvement in the Sri Lankan conflict from the beginning, what would be the position that you would recommend India to take with respect to the investigation of war crimes?
India is a very important member of the United Nations. It's very influential and it's part of the international community. When these serious crimes and atrocities are taking place right next door in Sri Lanka, it is their responsibility to intervene to protect people. You know, that's what sovereignty means. Each government should protect their own citizens. And when they fail to do so, it's a responsibility of other governments to intervene and do so. So international law is very clear on universal jurisdiction. India, in my view, failed to intervene in the early stages when they could have taken very firm steps to ensure that there's a process of justice and reconciliation. They could have helped to prevent the deaths of almost 40,000 people. The argument that I find completely disappointing and invalid is the argument raised by India and even South Africa that these are internal matters. When 40,000 innocent civilians are killed, that is a matter of concern for the international community. All the statutes say so. The United Nations intervened in Rwanda, in the Baltics, they intervened in Libya and other countries. They should have done so with Sri Lanka as well. So I think that the neighboring countries could have done much more.
What do you think India must have done?
Make much greater effort to talk and pressure the periodic Sri Lankan governments to stop using violence on their people.
Like some in the diaspora allege, do you also believe India was party to those war crimes and India assisted Sri Lanka in the war?
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that they assisted in the war crimes. And I don't think anyone should unless the facts prove such a point. I don't think the report goes that far. But let me say, since I'm speaking to a TV channel in Tamil Nadu, how much I respect the fact that the population of Tamil Nadu, not only its government and opposition leaders whom I met, but the whole population demanded an end to the violence and demanded justice. This is very important, both the calls of civil society and the pressure by civil society.
Even last week, the Tamil Nadu Assembly has brought out a resolution in demand of an international investigation. This was proposed by the Chief Minister, Ms. Jayalalitha. What do you have to say on that?
Well, I welcome that. That is the call that I have been making, because that is the guarantee of an independent and thorough process. So I do welcome that the Chief Minister called for an independent international investigation. These calls are very important. Let me say, when I was in Sri Lanka, talking to ordinary people, how much they appreciated this kind of support coming from Tamil Nadu. That came from a state. It should have come from the entire country.
Well, this is your point. Many sections in Sri Lanka, especially the Sri Lankan government, believes leaders in Tamil Nadu are playing politics on this issue. Even the Chief Minister of the Northern Province, Mr. C.V.Vigneswaran, complained that Tamil Nadu politicians are exploiting the Sri Lankan Tamil issue.
I'm sure there is. I'm not familiar with that. I would say then to the government and citizens of Tamil Nadu, always be balanced in your approach. So just like this report condemns atrocities committed by both sides, the LTT as well as government forces. So if you have a balance and you care about all people, whether they're Tamils or Sinhalese or Christians and Muslims who live in Sri Lanka, that would be an important diplomatic and politically correct position for Tamil Nadu to adopt.
So you welcome the efforts by the Chief Minister Jayalalitha on this matter?
I have learned through many years as an international civil servant that nothing happens unless there's pressure from civil society and pressure from and support from other governments. So this is it's very important that the Chief Minister maintains a strong stance on calling for justice.
Ms. Pillay, you have always maintained that you're a proud South African, but the people of Tamil Nadu still see you as their own daughter and take immense pride in your achievements. What would you like to say to the Tamils back home, to whom you're a hero in your own right?
Because I was an international civil servant, I didn't want to be seen as an ethnic Tamil. I'm not even seen as an ethnic Tamil in South Africa. And so I had to say I am a South African national. But I absolutely do not deny my Tamil ethnicity. I'm very proud to be a Tamil because we truly understand the culture and values with which we were brought up. And this is why I wept when I saw how the young women and girls were treated, the violence to which they were subjected. Some of them were stripped naked. Because this is so much against the grain of the way Tamils bring up their girls, for instance. We are a long-established culture, and I'm very proud, as I said, to be a Tamil person.
Ms. Pillay, it has indeed been a pleasure to interview you today. Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Hariyasan.